Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be doing another deep dive today, and this one is into something called spikeopathy.
Spikeopathy.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is.
But it's basically all about whether the spike protein from COVID-19
Right.
could be causing harm either from the virus itself
Okay.
or from the mRNA vaccines that use the spike protein.
Right.
So that's what we're going to be looking into, and we have a few different sources today.
Okay.
We have a research article that really lays out this idea of spikeopathy. And then we have some correspondence between the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration, which, for our listeners outside of Australia, that's kind of their version of the FDA,
Right.
and a senator who is raising concerns about the vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also going to look at some figures from a New South Wales government health report. So kind of a lot of different sources to dive into, but I think this will be a really fascinating discussion.
Yeah, I think so too. This is something that for a while people were kind of assuming that the spike protein was just, a harmless key that allowed the virus to get into our cells.
Yeah.
But more and more research is coming out suggesting that it actually plays a more active role and potentially a harmful one.
That's interesting because I remember early in the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about the case fatality rate of COVID-19. And there were some studies suggesting that it wasn't statistically that different from common coronaviruses.
Right.
Something like 1.3%.
Yeah.
Which obviously any death is tragic.
Of course.
But it wasn't necessarily like this apocalyptic figure that some people were predicting.
Yeah, and that's an important point to consider. A lot of the models that were being used to kind of project how bad things were going to get.
Right.
They weren't really taking that lower fatality rate into account. And so, if they had, maybe the projections would have looked a little bit different, and maybe even some of the policies that were put in place might have been different.
Yeah, makes you wonder.
Mm.
And then, fast forward to like late 2022, and we have some data from New South Wales.
Yeah.
That's one of the states in Australia. And their data was showing that unvaccinated people were barely showing up in the hospitalization data.
Really?
But the vaccinated were overrepresented, and that seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean,
It does.
weren't the vaccines supposed to keep people out of the hospital?
Well, yeah, that's the idea. But, it's important to look at this data carefully. It doesn't necessarily mean the vaccines were useless.
Right.
They definitely played a role in mitigating the pandemic. But
Yeah.
it does suggest that maybe there's more to the story.
Okay.
And that maybe there are some downsides to, this widespread spike protein production that we need to look into, especially in, younger, healthier individuals.
Right. That's a really good point. So speaking of downsides, let's talk about the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration.
Okay.
And we have this correspondence between them and Senator Rennick, who was raising concerns about the possibility of spike protein toxicity from the vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the TGA's response to that?
Well, their main argument was that the spike protein isn't infectious
Okay.
or a pathogen in kind of the traditional sense.
Right.
They really focused on its role as an antigen, which is the part that triggers your immune response.
Right.
But it seems like they were kind of missing the point of Senator Rennick's concern, which was that the spike protein itself, regardless of whether it acts like a virus, could actually be having some harmful effects.
Okay, so let's get into like the nitty-gritty of how the spike protein could be causing damage.
Okay.
And I think it's helpful to think of this as like a journey through your body.
Okay.
How could spikenopathy be impacting different systems as we go?
Sure, yeah. Think about it this way. The spike protein can bind to these things called ACE2 receptors.
Okay.
And those are like little doorways on your cells.
Wow.
And these receptors are all over your body, not just in your lungs.
Oh, so it's not just a respiratory thing.
Right. It's much more complex than that.
Okay.
And when the spike protein latches onto these receptors, it can trigger inflammation and potentially even blood clots.
Interesting. And are the vaccines kind of making this problem worse?
Well, that's what some of their research is suggesting, and it has to do with the way that the mRNA vaccines are delivered. You see, they use these tiny little lipid nanoparticles
Right.
to basically carry the mRNA to your cells.
Okay.
And studies are showing that these nanoparticles can travel to all sorts of different organs. They can even cross the blood-brain barrier and the blood-placenta barrier.
So wait, are you saying that the vaccine's delivery system could be more invasive than the virus itself?
It's a possibility, and it could explain why we're seeing potential issues in so many different parts of the body.
Wow, that's a pretty wild thought.
It is, and it's something that we definitely need to investigate further.
For sure.
Yeah.
So besides those ACE2 receptors, are there other ways that the spike protein could be causing problems?
Yeah, there are a few other mechanisms that researchers are looking into. For example, the spike protein can disrupt a protein called CD147.
Okay.
And this protein plays a role in all sorts of things like heart health, blood vessel function, and even how your brain works.
So we're talking about potential problems that go way beyond just breathing issues.
Exactly.
Okay, and is there anything else that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there's more. It can also interfere with your immune system by messing with what are called toll-like receptors,
Okay.
and that can lead to even more inflammation throughout your body.
Hmm.
And here's another interesting one. The spike protein can actually bind to estrogen receptors.
Oh, wow.
And this could explain why some women have experienced menstrual irregularities after getting vaccinated.
That makes sense.
So
It seems like this spike protein is quite the troublemaker.
it does seem that way.
And we haven't even talked about the fact that it can interfere with tumor suppressor proteins like P53, BRCA1, and BRCA8, which obviously brings up a whole other set of concerns about potential links to cancer.
It's definitely a complex picture, and we're still learning about the full extent of spikeopathy. This is an emerging area of research, and while the evidence is concerning, we need more studies to really understand the long-term implications.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot more to unpack here, but maybe we should take a quick break and then come back and talk about some of the specific health problems that are linked to spikeopathy.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into spikeopathy. Before the break, we were talking about all the different ways that the spike protein could be wreaking havoc in the body.
Yeah, it really is quite fascinating.
And I think it's really helpful to kind of break it down by system. So let's start with the cardiovascular system.
Right.
We talked about myocarditis and pericarditis earlier,
Right.
but it seems like the potential problems go way beyond that.
Yeah, it's not just about inflammation of the heart muscle itself. We also have to consider the spike protein's potential to cause blood clots.
Right, because those clots can lead to all sorts of problems.
Exactly. They can block blood flow to the heart, causing a heart attack, or they can travel to the brain and cause a stroke.
And that's scary because we tend to think of those as problems for older people.
Right, but we're seeing reports of these things happening in younger and younger individuals.
So it really seems like this spike protein could be accelerating cardiovascular disease.
It's a real possibility.
Okay, so we've got heart attacks, strokes, potentially even aneurysms.
Right.
I mean, this is a pretty long list of potential problems.
It is, and we can't forget about the autoimmune system.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We touched on that earlier, but I'd love to hear more about how the spike protein could be triggering autoimmune reactions.
Well, it's like this. When your body encounters a foreign invader, like a virus or bacteria,
Right.
your immune system kicks into gear and starts producing antibodies to fight it off.
Ugh.
But with the mRNA vaccines, you're essentially instructing your body to produce the spike protein itself.
So it's like tricking your immune system into attacking something that's supposed to be there.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what can happen is that your immune system gets a little confused and it starts attacking not just the spike proteins,
Oh, no.
but also your own cells and tissues.
And that's what an autoimmune disease is, right?
Exactly. It's your immune system turning against you.
So what kind of autoimmune problems are we seeing potentially linked to this spikeopathy idea?
Well, we're seeing a wide range of things. Everything from skin disorders like rashes and hives to neurological problems like Guillain-Barré syndrome to even problems with internal organs like the kidneys and the liver.
So basically, any part of the body that has those ACE2 receptors could be vulnerable.
That's the concern.
And speaking of vulnerable parts of the body, let's talk about the brain.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that the spike protein can cross the blood-brain barrier. So what are the implications of that? I mean, what kind of neurological issues are we seeing?
Well, this is an area where we really need more research, but we're already seeing reports of people experiencing things like brain fog, memory problems, headaches, even changes in personality. And some researchers are concerned that this could be the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, no.
They're worried that spikeopathy could be a contributing factor to the development of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Wow, hold on a second. Are you saying there could be a link between this spike protein and Alzheimer's?
It's a possibility, and it's definitely something we need to investigate further.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is, and it really highlights the importance of understanding the potential long-term consequences of this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the cardiovascular system, the autoimmune system, the brain. I mean, it seems like this spikeopathy thing could be affecting just about every system in the body.
It really does have the potential to be quite widespread.
So is there any good news here? I mean, are there any potential solutions or ways to mitigate these risks?
Well, one thing that's encouraging is that traditional vaccines, the ones that use inactivated viruses,
Right.
haven't been linked to the same level of adverse events.
So it seems like it's not vaccines in general that are the problem, but maybe this specific mRNA technology.
That's what some of the research is suggesting.
Okay, so what about the Novavax vaccine? That uses a different approach, doesn't it?
It does. Novavax uses a protein-based vaccine, so it doesn't involve injecting mRNA into your cells.
Okay.
However, it's still delivered with a lipid nanoparticle matrix. And as we discussed, those nanoparticles can travel throughout the body.
Right.
So it's possible that the spike protein from the Novavax vaccine could still be reaching different organs, including the brain.
And have there been any reports of problems with Novavax?
There have been some reports of myocarditis following Novavax vaccination.
Oh, so even with a different approach, we're still seeing some of the same potential issues.
It seems like the spike protein itself might be the common denominator here.
This whole Spikeopathy thing really is like a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces.
It is, and unfortunately the stakes are incredibly high.
It really is a puzzle, and it's one that I think a lot of people are rightfully concerned about.
Yeah.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I know it can be a bit overwhelming
Yeah.
to think about all the potential risks associated with this Spikeopathy idea. But, I think it's important to remember that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about these potential risks, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions about our health.
Right. And this isn't just about COVID-19. This mRNA technology is being explored for all sorts of other diseases. So
Oh, yeah.
the things that we're learning now about spikeopathy could really have implications far beyond this pandemic.
That's a really good point. It's
Yeah.
like we're at the forefront of this whole new era of medicine, and we need to make sure that we're proceeding with caution and that we're not just blindly embracing these new technologies without fully understanding the potential downsides.
Exactly. And that's where I think, informed consent becomes so important.
Right.
As individuals, we have a right to understand the potential risks and benefits of any medical intervention,
Yeah.
including vaccines. And we need to be having open and honest conversations with our healthcare providers to make sure that we're making the best decisions for our own individual circumstances.
And I think that's something that we've kind of lost sight of a little bit,
Yeah.
in recent years.
Yeah, I think so.
Like we've been so focused on the collective good
Right.
that we've forgotten about the importance of individual autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we've talked a lot about the potential downsides of Spikeopathy, but I'm wondering if there's a silver lining here. What if by understanding these risks, we can actually pave the way for safer and more effective medical technologies in the future?
That's a great question, and I think it really speaks to the power of human ingenuity.
Yeah.
We've faced challenges in medicine before, and we've found ways to overcome them.
Right.
And I believe that with careful research and a commitment to transparency, we can do the same with this mRNA technology.
I love that perspective. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It's about learning from our mistakes
Right.
and adapting our approach and ultimately using science to improve human health in a safe and responsible way.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And for our listeners out there, we hope this information empowers you to ask questions, seek out reliable sources, and engage in thoughtful conversations about your health and the future of medicine.
Yeah, that's so important.
Remember, knowledge is power, and by staying informed, we can all play a role in shaping a healthier future for ourselves and for generations to come. So until next time, stay curious and keep learning.